Hello and a warm welcome to HW News Network, your one-stop show, truth to be told, for some engaging and thought-provoking conversations. President Donald Trump cut short his trip to Canada for a meeting with the world leaders and he took off for Washington. And what did he say? That he's got some very important work to attend. But what happened in between? French President Emmanuel Macron spoke to the reporters and he said that probably there is a ceasefire which is in the works between Iran and Israel. And then Donald Trump condemned that statement of Emmanuel Macron. He almost castigated Macron by saying that he was publicity hungry. He returned back to Washington not for the ceasefire, but something much bigger. So the big question now is that what's really happening as far as the Israel and Iran war is concerned? Will Donald Trump now force Iran to surrender? That's question number one. Second question is that will America now side with Israel to mount a bigger war? Then the third possibility is that what will happen to the geopolitical dynamics if at all this Middle East becomes so unstable? So there are many, many questions. And what we are hearing and what the news websites have just reported that the Israel, as of now on today's date, has appeared to be expanding its air campaign on Tehran, which is on the fifth day after its surprise attack on Iran's military and nuclear program. And mind you, while he was going to Washington, Donald Trump put out an ominous message warning the residents of Tehran to evacuate. And Mr. Trump said he wanted a real end to the nuclear problem with Iran giving up entirely on nuclear weapons. But is that possible? Joining me this evening is former ambassador to the US, Ambassador Mira Shankar joins us this evening and who's followed US very, very closely. And I don't think there'll be a better diplomat to talk to on this particular issue. Thank you so much, ma'am. It's always a pleasure having you on the program. And your first thoughts on the fact that Donald Trump said he wants a real end to this problem. What is that real end which Donald Trump is really seeking at?
Well, we can't really say at this stage because he's veered between two poles, On the one hand, he began by saying that he had advised Israel not to attack because talks were going on and that he was hopeful that some deal might be concluded. And then he has steadily sharpened his tone and said that, asking people to evacuate from Tehran and something big is coming, and the other is that they should finish it. So we really don't know whether he's going to veer towards, providing Israel the wherewithal to knock out the remaining parts of Iran's nuclear program, or whether he will have the US itself come in to the conflict because the US has got its ships and fighter jets and missiles all ready. But of course it says these are in a defensive posture. At the moment, Pete Hegseth has said that these are in a defensive posture. So we really don't know. And the situation is complicated by the fact that Trump's constituency itself is split on the issue. There is one lot which feels that the US should not jump in and that Israel has unnecessarily dragged the US into a war which is not of its choosing. But on the other hand, there is a group, within the Republican Party, Lindsey Graham and others who feel, yes, the US should back Israel fully. So given Mr. Trump's own, toing and froing on the issue, and the fact that his constituency is split, and which part of that constituency prevails at any given moment, we are really not sure how Trump is going to carry this forward.
Okay, so the kind of reports which we are seeing, and when he had boarded the flight for Washington, during that time, Israeli Channel 14 was reporting that Donald Trump is expected to sign an order within hours to formally enter the Israel-Iran war. Now, what is the possibility of that, ma'am? Do you see the possibility of America now standing with Israel to wage a war against Iran so that the real end can be sought, what he has been talking about? Yes, ma'am. Can you hear me?
Um, well, I'm not sure that Trump would like to take the US directly into the war.
Okay.
But, the point is that Israel needs US weapons to attack the Iranian nuclear site at Fordow, which is the main place for uranium enrichment and where their uranium enrichment stockpiles, enriched uranium stockpiles, are also kept. Iran, after the US had walked out of the last agreement under Trump's first term, Iran had, after some time, told the IAEA that they would also not be adhering to the thresholds which had been agreed upon because the US had backed out of the agreement. So instead of 3.65 or whatever percent, which was the threshold agreed upon, they had begun enriching till 60%.
Yes, ma'am.
I think there's some gapping
No, no, ma'am.
of
I
the
can hear you
image.
very clearly. No, no, no.
Okay,
I can hear you
okay,
very clearly. Go ahead,
sure,
please.
sure.
Yes.
So those enriched stockpiles which Iran has accumulated are kept at Fordow, buried under a mountain. And so these would require bunker buster bombs, which only the US has, to be able to actually hit it effectively. Iran had hit Natanz, where uranium enrichment is taking place and there are centrifuges. That I think it managed to damage to some extent. It had also hit Isfahan, and now the third place it had hit was Fordow, but it had not really damaged the Fordow site because it needs these special weapons which can burrow deep. So without US agreeing to either transfer those weapons or agreeing to join the war itself, I think this part of Iran's nuclear program would remain intact. Now, it's also possible that the Iranians are signaling that they might show greater flexibility in negotiations, and the negotiations Trump had initially said had gone very well. Then he had said no, it doesn't look as though a deal is going to be possible. And the difference was that the US wanted Iran to give up uranium enrichment altogether and get its enriched uranium fuel for its reactors from a consortium of countries abroad, the US, UAE, Saudi Arabia, etc. And Trump was proposing that this consortium create an enriched uranium facility on an island and supply it to Iran. Now, this was not acceptable to Iran, which said that we need to retain our right to develop nuclear energy for civil uses, and that we were allowed, even under the last agreement, to enrich uranium to a threshold of 3.6 uh, under IAEA safeguards and with the provision of surprise IAEA inspections. So Iran wanted to come up with an alternative proposal of its own. So we don't know now if Iran is signaling greater flexibility on the US proposal, in which case there may be a temptation to do a deal. But what you won't see Trump doing is working for a ceasefire, because he says now we should finish
That's
the
completely ruled out
problem.
now.
So either a formal peace deal in which Iran gives up its right to enrichment, even at very low thresholds, or then, strengthening Israel's hands to take out the remaining elements of Iran's nuclear program. But of course, this may not be the end of the story, because at the end of the day, if Iran has the capability, maybe it will take more time, but they will be able to put it together again. And perhaps this might also strengthen their resolve. We really
No, but
don't
ma'am,
know.
what you are explaining, it really makes me, begs that question that Israel was considered to be the unsinkable ship of America, and especially in the Middle East. And now seeing that Israel is equally vulnerable at the hands of Iran, uh, is it not like a big setback for Israel as well as America? And it's really jolted them, because this was a this was a war which began uh, with the notion that apparently Iran is more vulnerable, but now it seems that the tables have turned.
Look, I think the Israelis have done substantial damage within Iran. Iran has marshaled its missiles and drones to hit back at Israel, but at the moment the damage appears disproportionate for Iran, because 224 people have died, their nuclear sites have been hit, senior military commanders have been killed, senior scientists working on their nuclear program have been killed. Uh, the commander in chief, now the new one who has taken over, is apparently again killed in an Israeli operation. And now the Israelis have also attacked Iranian oil and gas fields, which would make Iran more economically vulnerable. But the Iranians have shown the resolve, and some of their missiles and drones have managed to penetrate the Israeli Iron Dome, and of course the US, because the US is also helping Israel shoot down missiles and drones as they are coming in, and have hit targets in Tel Aviv or in other places in Israel. And about 24 people are believed to have died in these attacks. But this is versus 224 in Iran, and much more extensive damage to infrastructure. Now, the question is that there really was no specific intelligence that Iran was about to make the bomb. The US uh, Director of National Intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard herself, in the assessment that she had given in March this year, basically had said that Iran is about 3 years away still from having the ability to make nuclear weapons. Though it has, gathered stockpiles and things, it's not imminent. It is not something which is imminent. And there have been no warnings that something drastic has happened which would lead to the conclusion that an Iranian nuclear weapon was imminent. So, I think Netanyahu, taking advantage of the fact that Trump has backed him, beyond reason also, for instance, in Gaza, pushed the envelope, thwarted the dialogue between the US and Iran, and has now pushed the US into a position where they have this dilemma. Do they resume negotiations with Iran? Do they support Israel in more belligerence vis-a-vis Iran, or do they enter the war themselves? So the US's choices, in a sense, have been pushed or forced, are being pushed or forced by Netanyahu. So let's see
But
what it
when you talk
finally
about
decides.
Netanyahu, Ambassador Shankar, Netanyahu has also given an interview to Fox News where he spoke about the political assassination of Ayatollah Khomeini. Now, this is for the second time that he's admitted it, that, a plot like this was being hatched. Earlier, also, when he spoke of this, it was corroborated by Donald Trump himself. How seriously does one take this particular statement, which has been made by Netanyahu himself in an interview to Fox News?
Yes, I think that this is one of the objectives that Israel has been working for ever since the agitations in Iran against the hijab, started. And then there were mass arrests within Iran and a lot of turmoil and ferment. Israel has always been hoping that somehow the economic pressure on Iran, the difficult economic situation with a high inflation, lack of jobs, that all this, along with, the uh, could I say, the irritation of middle class liberal Iranians against the social restrictions and mores forced by the religious leadership, that somehow this would lead to the overthrow of the regime. But that hasn't happened because, there is a liberal elite in Iran which could feel opposition to the existing regime, but there are also people, large numbers of people in rural Iran who support the regime. And in the face of attacks from a country like Israel, the general tendency would be to actually consolidate, people would stand by the government and the country rather than look at regime change at this juncture. But that is something that Netanyahu has been talking about openly, and not just, a people-led movement, but now actually assassinations of the leadership, which is something, really not in the normal course of the diplomatic armory or in the normal course of international relations.
But what would you say, ma'am, that if Israel's prime minister talks openly about political assassinations and that too in TV interviews, is this something like a transgression you see in diplomacy? I mean, we've not heard like people talking about these political assassinations so openly ever before, and it does come as a surprise, isn't it?
Well, I think Netanyahu and the Israelis have always, taken the view that for Israel, actually, their primary purpose is survival. And in the pursuit of survival, anything is fair game. Now, this is not possible for other countries to do because they don't have the unqualified US backing and the backing of the Western world like Israel does. I mean, nobody questions Israel's behavior, either in Gaza, where a great humanitarian tragedy is, ongoing right now, or elsewhere. It's taken as somehow the special circumstances of Jewish suffering and the special circumstances under which Israel was created somehow give it the leeway to go outside the norms of international behavior because they are so desperate for their own survival.
But, ma'am, do you think that Donald Trump also has his own limitations, and there is a limit beyond which he would think twice before jumping into the fray? Because his own American defense analysts and his advisors, his former army officials, have warned. They've berated Netanyahu in a way for seeking to involve the U.S. For his personal fight. Do you think that he would go to that extent? because given the fact that some 77 million Americans voted for Donald Trump because he promised to end the overseas conflicts and halt the march to World War III. So there is a certain limitation within which Donald Trump might function, and he cannot operate unleashed absolutely.
Yeah, it would be a complete volte-face on the platform on which he got elected, which was that he's going to end the wars in Ukraine and in Gaza, and that he will not drag the US into foreign entanglements, particularly military entanglements, at the cost of US lives and US treasure, because the US has spent huge amounts on the war in Iraq, in Afghanistan, in Syria, and so on. And I think with the burgeoning US deficit, the conservatives and parts of the MAGA establishment basically felt that the US needed to retrench its overseas military entanglements and look towards building its own economy back home, and that should be the priority. So if Trump
But
does do this, it
right.
would be a complete volte-face. But
Ambassador
he has
Shankar,
been known to do. He
right.
has
But
been known to change.
right. But there's another aspect which is being discussed on the social media, and that is, and I'm just going to read out a tweet, very interesting one, in fact, which says that Netanyahu doesn't want to allow US citizens to leave Israel. And he's literally trying to hold them hostage in order for there to be US casualties and use that to push the US into the foolish war he started with Iran. What would you say to this? And of course, it's a very interesting development which is really happening as a matter of fact in Israel. Yes, Ambassador Shankar, can you hear me? Ambassador Shankar, can you hear me?
Sorry.
Yes. No, so I was just reading out that tweet to you. That's a very interesting one. And I really wanted your take on that, where a person has written that Netanyahu doesn't want to allow US citizens to leave Israel. He's literally trying to hold them hostage in order for there to be US casualties and use that to push the US into the foolish war he started with Iran. What would you really say to this observation?
Well, he may certainly try to use, the presence of U.S. citizens as, you know, an instrument to force the Americans into the war. If any of them is injured or hit, then the US hand could be forced. But till now, the Iranians have been careful, and they have not targeted any US personnel in the region, US bases or US ships. So the US till now has not been a target of Iranian missile attacks.
But what can we expect now, ma'am? Is the war going to escalate, or Donald Trump will try and intervene and control the situation? And there has been a threat of a nuclear explosion. I was reading it somewhere. I don't know how far that is true. That there was an earthquake felt. There was a tweet which was sent by someone, and I'm really not going to. I don't know the authenticity of it, but someone very credible forwarded to me, where the tweet clearly said, and I'll just read out what it said, and if you can just elaborate a little of what it said. It said that it's there is a breaking news that Iran's 6.2 magnitude earthquake occurred in Sistan, Baluchistan province, and Israel. Yeah, so I don't know what to say about this. I mean, are we going to see the situation intensifying from here on, as what we have seen? Is it going to get worse?
Well, it could get worse, certainly, but I hope it gets better. At the moment, it looks like there will be escalation on both sides. And certainly attacking nuclear, facilities, fuel, and so on, carries the risk of radiation fallout. I mean, the IAEA till now has said that there's been no radiation detected around Natanz or elsewhere. But certainly, if these attacks are expanded, that is something which could actually be quite horrendous if there is something like this, because it could contaminate the entire atmosphere, as we saw, in Ukraine at the time when there was that accident in their nuclear plant, or in Japan.
My last question to you now, Ambassador Shankar, is that in all this conflict between Israel and Iran, what are the big diplomatic takeaways for a country like India? Because there are a lot of questions on the way we have taken a stand. The opposition is consistently asking questions, but what according to you should be the big takeaways for India?
I think for India, the important thing is that that there is no escalation, and that steps are put in place to de-escalate the situation. I think that it could impact our economy because the price of oil has already gone up by 5 to 6%. It could go up further if Iranian oil supplies are damaged seriously, uh, or shipping uh, is impacted because Iran blocks the Gulf of Hormuz, or shipping in the Red Sea area, or whatever. The Houthis do that. So there is a fallout which India would face, uh, plus the fact that insurance charges go up for, as we saw when the Houthis were attacking shipping, that ships had to start coming around the Cape of Good Hope. So it increased the freight charges for us to ship to Europe. And also the insurance premiums went up at a time when the global economy is already facing a slowdown because of America's unpredictable tariff policies. I think anything which hits India's economy would be something to be avoided. Secondly, we have a large number of Indian nationals working in the Gulf, I think 8 million or more, and they send home a lot of remittances. If tensions continue, you might see, people wanting to come back. Again, that's not something
Yes.
which would be helpful to India at this juncture, in particular, when we are already facing economic uncertainty at the global level. But beyond that, I think it's also important that India measure the positions it takes, because we have never adopted one sided positions. Even as our relations with Israel have improved dramatically and it has become a major defense partner, we have always kept in mind the Palestinians as well, and the need for, to avert a humanitarian disaster and to allow food and other assistance in for the population of Gaza. So, in that sense, I think perhaps somewhere this balance has, been a victim in the recent positions that we have taken. It's important to try to restore that, because while we have equities in Israel, we also have equities in the Gulf, in Saudi Arabia, in the UAE, in Qatar, in all these countries. And, one of the questions which these are delegations which had gone, the MPs' delegations which were sent and which had gone to this region, one of the questions that they were asked by the countries in the Gulf was, what is India's position on Palestine? And I think that's important for India to try to ensure that we restore some balance in the positions that we are projecting, uh, while keeping in account the very important strategic relationship that we have with Israel. I think you have to find a way of fine tuning your positions.
Right. Right, and you very aptly said, but how India is going to think of fine tuning the relationship, we'll have to wait and see. And who knows, by tomorrow morning, some more headlines will change, and we will have to keep a close watch on what is happening between Israel and Iran, because that's the biggest story of the world unfolding before everyone. Thank you so much, Ambassador Shankar. It was a real pleasure having you on the program. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.